Welcome, everybody, to Betwixt the Lines. This is a podcast where we are going to read Betwixt the Lines.
Correct.
We're going to read a book, perhaps every month. We're going to read a few chapters. We're going to section the book up into segments, correct? And we're going to read the book, and then we're going to give our thoughts and opinions. We're going to do some analysis. And it's kind of like a book club. You can join in,
read along,
come along with us for this exciting journey, and give us your takes and opinions on the book. So this month, we're going to be reading... Oh, this won't even show, will it? It's kind of green.
Hold it over you, not the...
The Lion,
background.
the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's going to be a hole through me.
That's fine.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
By Clive Staples Lewis.
By Clive Staples Lewis. An excellent book in the series of the Chronicles of Narnia. We read a few months ago The Magician's Nephew, which is the prequel to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
In our personal lives, not on the pod.
Yes, in our personal lives.
For the viewers.
And we decided we wanted to do this podcast, so it just made sense to continue with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Also, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe coming soon to a church near us, and also coming soon to a Netflix near you. Our church is putting on a production of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But also, there is a new version of the Chronicles of Narnia coming to Netflix, a series created by Greta Gerwig.
And she says it's all about rock and roll.
She says it's all about rock and roll.
Do it that way you will.
I thought it was all about Jesus. Silly me. But it's Charlie XCX cast as...
Spoilers.
Well, she's let them all know.
She's in talks to play the White Witch.
Potentially. And we were talking about how we want... You want to say what you want?
Yeah.
What you'd like to see?
Jack Harlow to be Mr. Tumnus. If that's the type of people we're casting, I feel he would be perfect. Comment below if you agree.
He'd be a perfect Mr. Tumnus. That would be great.
Yes.
But yeah, so I believe The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe has 17 chapters. And so we're splitting it up into 4 chapters, 5 chapters.
Yes.
We're going to do...
4 segments.
Yes, 4 segments. We're going to do a finale episode where we do 5 chapters. But for this episode, we've read 4 chapters of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And we wanted to just kind of give a summary, talk through what happened, and some little analysis bits, what we think about it.
We thought it would be a good book to start with because most people have read it or at least know of it.
Yeah, I've seen the movie, whatever. So I guess we'll start with just key bits from chapter 1, right? Okay. Chapter 1 is called Lucy Looks into a Wardrobe. And it discusses the 4 main characters right off the bat: Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. It says, so sorry to derail a little bit, but I did actually want to read, just for everybody, the little intro that C.S. Lewis writes, because I think that it's interesting and worth reading. Yes?
Well, it's to his niece or like goddaughter or someone, a younger relative in his family that the book was intentioned for. So
yeah,
that's the context.
So yeah, he wrote it as an intended to just be a fairy tale for her. But I think it's very interesting and profound what he says. He says, "My dear Lucy, I wrote this story for you, but when I began it, I had not realized that girls grow quicker than books. As a result, you are already too old for fairy tales, and by the time it is printed and bound, you will be older still. But someday, you will be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. You can then take it down from some upper shelf, dust it, and tell me what you think of it. I shall probably be too deaf to hear and too old to understand a word you say, but I shall still be your affectionate godfather, C.S. Lewis." So I just think that's an interesting thing. I think it's like a fairly famous quote
Shared
of his
quote, yeah.
of yeah, one day you'll be old enough to start reading fairy tales again. Which is I think just a really interesting thing, and I think it's kind of like a window into like C.S. Lewis's like worldview of the way that these stories sort of help us interpret the world, and how I don't know. I think a lot about how fairy tales sort of all. Oh, Pepper.
Our puppy is sad.
Our puppy is sad. Um, how fairy tales all like kind of link back to the Bible, and tell these sort of grand narratives that have many things that can be drawn from them. That you know, like a fairy tale. I think we have this idea of a fairy tale. That it's like just like a morality story, like a morality tale where, you know, Jack and the Beanstalk is all about don't get too greedy or whatever.
Yeah.
Like they have some distinct lesson in them, and sure they may, but there's also like a lot more there, especially like the famous fairy tales.
Yeah, I think one, like, fiction allows you to empathize in a way that nonfiction doesn't. And so it can also tell a story similar to the Bible or whatever it might be about, where it's like it's more accessible and like gives that story a new lens, like to be like easily interpreted by a child, right? It has the same soul of the story that he's kind of writing an analogy for, but in a way that can be so easily and clearly interpreted even by a child. So it's beautiful that way as well. But then also, of course, there's takeaways for an adult as well.
Well, yes, and like especially the fairy tales that really stick around for a long time, they have all of these layers where, like, yes, they can be
Decadent layers.
decadent layers, truly, where they can all be like on the surface level understood by a child. But then there's like deeper and deeper layers, like scripture, where there's deeper and deeper layers. That there's always like a new thing that you can take away from a good fairy tale, a good story like that. And I really think C.S. Lewis's writing is like that. So he does a good job at it, creating new fairy tales, because he kind of knows where they all come from and how to connect back to their source, right? Yeah, I just thought we'd start with that because it's interesting. So yeah, back to chapter 1. It introduces our 4 main characters, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. Something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. So it does sort of start off with that, like, I think in the movie it does depict like what they're running from, like the air raids or whatever. But the book just kind of tells
Briefly mentions it.
Yeah, that they're running away from the war.
And going to stay with their uncle. That's very important. Their uncle.
Is he their uncle? Oh yeah, Uncle Diggory.
Yeah.
Yes. The house,
professor?
This just says the house of an old professor. I don't know if
it's
it
not
later,
clear that he's blood, but either way.
Yes. But an old professor, I don't think it even says his name at the beginning, to be fair, but I think it does.
Well, in The Magician's Nephew, it literally says, in brackets, he will be the professor seen in later novels when he introduces Diggory.
Yes.
So C.S. Lewis does want us to know that.
Yeah.
It is important to him.
I actually really enjoy that about his writing.
That he breaks the fourth wall.
Yeah, he breaks the fourth wall all the time, and he's like, this is something that happens in a later novel. And it's just like he completely like addresses what he's doing.
Yeah.
Leaves nothing to you to wondering.
Yeah, he wants you to know what he is talking about.
Yes. But yes, so they're sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife and lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face as well as his head, and they liked him almost at once because he's very trustworthy. I think that's an interesting detail too. That they instantly like him. Unlike Uncle Andrew, who I think is Diggory and who's the girl?
Polly. They're
Yeah.
not related.
No, I know, but I'm saying Diggory and Polly immediately are like kind of distrustful of Uncle Andrew.
Well, I think every child that C.S. Lewis writes is like various levels of discernment, but usually
Yes.
someone's like they're sus if
Yeah.
they're sus.
Yeah.
So it's important they trust him. Yeah.
So odd looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it, which I think that's a funny line too. Yeah, and so they're kind of just exploring the house, having fun as kids do. It's a giant house.
How giant?
How giant, you ask? Well, let me read you a passage.
Of course.
Lucy says, hadn't we all better go to bed? There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here. No, there won't, said Peter. I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between. So, in betwixt,
Yes,
sorry.
of course.
As this is betwixt the lines. So that's crazy.
Could be an exaggeration, or it's just so funny to think that it is a 10-minute walk to the dining room.
Yes, we were saying
Just
like
sprawling.
because we were trying to imagine a 10-minute walk in any house, like even in like a castle.
Yeah.
I don't know, like so we were thinking like, is that just kids exaggerating because they're kids? But also Peter's like the older one.
Yeah, he wouldn't be the one to exaggerate, you would think.
You would
the way
think.
He's characterized.
Yeah, so maybe
So
it
it
really
could be
is.
genuinely the largest house you've ever heard of.
Yeah.
Which is funny.
Which they do say. They do say it's like the largest house ever. And you know, Diggory's a bit magical. He's has some magic things going on in his house. Because of, should we say stuff from The Magician's Nephew, or is that spoilers? I feel like it's a prequel.
It's not spoilers.
So it's like,
yeah, it's the first book in the series.
You know, so he in The Magician's Nephew, he receives some fruit from a tree in a secret magic garden. Some obvious symbolism to the Garden of Eden. And the tree of the forbidden fruit. And the White Witch tries to convince him to eat it, like Satan, because she's Satan. And he doesn't. He's a good boy, and he does not eat the fruit. And he takes it back to Aslan, and Aslan lets him have a piece of the fruit because the White Witch tries to deceive him. And, deceives him with a kernel of truth, which is that if he were to take that fruit back to his homeworld and allow his mother to eat some of it, she would be healed of her sickness. She's very sick. But he does what's right, and he takes the fruit diligently to Aslan. And Aslan, being good, allows him to take some of the fruit back to his home world, Earth, and give it to his mother to heal her. And after she eats the fruit, I believe he plants the seeds from the fruit, and it grows a tree in his garden that he eventually chops down and makes into a wardrobe. And that wardrobe is the wardrobe in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
In the spare room.
And yeah, I believe at the end of it, he even does like say this is the same wardrobe.
Yeah.
That would come into play.
Make no mistake.
Yes, make no mistake. He like very clearly spells it out. But I thought that was interesting because also the fruit is used to grow a tree in Narnia. So there's a tree in Narnia that's like the tree of Narnia. Right. It's the tree that like
the first tree.
The first tree. It's the tree that protects Narnia from the evil of the White Witch. And so it's worth noting that there's a tree from this fruit in Narnia, and then there's also a tree from this fruit.
Do you think
that's in
if they depict
Earth.
The Magician's Nephew, Apple by Charlie XCX, will be genuinely performed in it?
I certainly hope so. That would be excellent.
We're not. We're only half serious.
But yes, there's a tree from this fruit that's in Narnia, and then there's another tree from this fruit that's on Earth, and that tree is made into a wardrobe, so that's how there's a connection from Earth back to Narnia through this wardrobe, which is interesting to know. Yes, so she goes through and she meets Mr. Tumnus, and they meet. Goodness gracious me, said the fawn. Good evening, said Lucy. but the fawn was so busy picking up its parcels that it did not reply. Good evening, said the fawn. Excuse me, I don't want to be inquisitive, but should I be right in thinking that you were a daughter of Eve? So he knows kind of what she is, and he's looking for daughters of Eve.
Yeah.
And so he convinces her to come back. He tells her that she's in Narnia. I was wondering whether I ought to be back. And he says it's only just around the corner. And there'll be a roaring fire and toast and sardines and cake. And so she's inviting her to this lovely tea and cake and sardines and delicious.
Back into his house. Yeah.
And he's a very charming fawn. And he is telling her stories, right? Is he telling her stories?
Of Narnia, I think, right? He's telling her about Narnia.
Yeah, and he's put some wood on the fire, and then he plays her a song, and she drifts off to sleep. And when she wakes up from her sleep, she's like, "Oh, I need to get out of here." And Mr. Tumnus is being all sad.
Because hours have passed.
Many hours have passed, and Mr. Tumnus is all sad, and he's like, "Oh, I'm a very bad fawn." So he kind of comes to his senses. He put Lucy to sleep because he is working for the White Witch, and he's instructed to bring any daughters of Eve or sons of Adam, meaning human boys or girls, to the White Witch for whatever her purposes may be. And there's a lot of foreshadowing, actually. That's something I wanted to talk about.
Right.
Is there's foreshadowing of these 4 thrones in Narnia. And it seems to be that there's some sort of prophecy that these 4 characters, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, will come to sit on these 4 thrones and rule over Narnia. Because as it stands, the White Witch calls herself the Queen of Narnia, but she's a false queen.
And for those who haven't read The Magician's Nephew, that's the same like queen that was in The Magician's Nephew.
Yes. What's her name?
Jadis.
Yes. And so, so it seems like there's a prophecy of these 4 thrones. And so it seems like the White Witch, who calls herself the Queen, is trying to prevent this prophecy from coming true. She's trying to gather these 4 children so that they can't take her throne and rule over Narnia.
Yeah.
And she even, it's touched on later when she's talking to Edmund, and Edmund is telling about that there's 4 of them, 4 of the children, and she seems very stuck on that detail that there's 4 of them. She keeps asking, like, really, there's just 4 of you? So she seems very set on that, and she really wants to get these kids. And we were talking about earlier how it's kind of like, is it Herod? Do we know if it's Herod?
Should we look that up on our iPad?
Yes.
Our handy dandy iPad?
On our Yes. Okay. It
Yes,
is.
okay.
All right. I wanted to make sure it was Herod and not some other like.
Don't want to cite the wrong king.
Yes. But King Herod, we like in the Gospel of Jesus's birth, there's the Magi's visit, and they come to King Herod and they tell him about this boy who will become king of the Jews, and King Herod is like the king of Judea under the Roman Empire, and so similarly, he doesn't want his throne to be usurped.
Yeah, he's trying to prevent a prophecy that's inevitable.
Yes, so he directs his men to Bethlehem, where the boy is supposed to be, to go and kill every newborn boy that they can find. And so I thought that was like probably like a pretty clear like like that's probably knowing C.S. Lewis probably intentional, intentionally like what do you call that? What's the literary word
like
for
an
that?
illusion?
Yeah. I think it's probably a pretty intentional allusion to Herod persecuting the newborn children, that there's this prophecy of someone who's going to be king, and trying to like preempt that prophecy from coming true.
Because I think also both worlds are in need of upheaval, right? Like in Narnia, it's always winter and over Christmas, and so the people are suffering, and there needs to be a change in the way that, like, obviously in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe change will be enacted, and the same in the Gospels, right? So, but there's someone who wants to prevent that upheaval of the way that society is.
Yes. So yeah, there's a pretty clear allusion there. Yes, but Lucy leaves. She forgives Mr. Tumnus.
Yeah, he's like, I'm
Um,
sorry that I've set you up, basically.
Mm-hmm. And he seems like very like he comes to his senses. It seems like he's only doing this thing out of fear.
Yeah, he's like earnestly apologetic. Like, I guess
Yes.
he's tricking her, but not in a horrible, deceptive, manipulative way like the
Yes.
queen is when we later see her meet Edmund. Like,
Mm-hmm.
Tumnus clearly feels guilt.
I want to read some parts from the
Yeah, we shall.
the Edmund part. We shall. He seems like he's genuinely a good fawn, in that he's earnestly repentant. He feels bad for what he's doing. He's doing it out of fear, but he ultimately does the right thing and tells her he was trying to trick her.
Well, it seems like it's like a mandate that
Yes.
anyone who lives in Narnia and form the queen of a son of Adam or daughter of Eve, you know, it's like maybe the law for him.
Yes, but it seems like some choose to be rebels and some choose to defy the queen, and some choose to obey the queen, and some people are kind of caught in the middle and don't know which way to go. And that seems to be Mr. Tumnus. And it seems like, like in his encounter with Lucy, he realizes what he's doing is wrong. Because prior to that, he'd probably never seen a human, and he's
like
probably
duping
like,
a child.
Yeah, he's probably like, well, if I see one, I guess I'll do this, whatever. But yes. So then Lucy comes back out of the wardrobe, and she calls to everyone. She's like, I'm here, I'm here. And they're all like, what do you mean you're here? Like, yeah, you're in the wardrobe. And they're kind of confused because no time has passed. So to her, she's been gone many hours.
Right.
But no time has actually passed in Earth time. Oh. There's dogs moving around.
But that's not. Maybe it hasn't been all that long, or maybe it has been all that long, because as we know, it's 10 minutes to the kitchen.
Right. Yes.
No, I'm joking.
It's 10 minutes to the kitchen.
Obviously, no time has passed.
So yes, very well could be 10 minutes. Oh.
We left off with.
Yes. So we had to take a little break. The camera was overheating. I'll have to figure out a solution to that. Behind the scenes. So we left off. Peas is going crazy.
Okay.
We left off. Lucy came back, and it seems like no time has passed. She tells everybody about what she saw in the wardrobe. And at first, they think she's playing a joke, but then she seems so certain of it that they seem to believe her. Yes. And they
check it out.
Yep, they go and check out the wardrobe. And Peter knocks on the back of the wardrobe, and sure enough, there's nothing there. So because of that, they're like, oh, we really thought you were serious for a second. And she seems absolutely convinced still.
Because it was the truth.
Yes, because it was the truth. So she seemed absolutely convinced because it was the truth. And Edmund is especially cruel in this regard. He keeps making fun of her. And her so-called Narnia. But then, sure enough...
Narnia.
Sure enough, a day later, or a few days go by, and it's another rainy day, and they decide to play hide and seek.
That's the song that's playing in the movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Go ahead.
We'll have to cut that in. I don't remember that part.
Okay. We don't have to cut that.
I don't remember the song that's playing, I guess. They're playing hide and seek, and Lucy just wants to get another look at the wardrobe. She's not planning on hiding there, but she figures she'll go in there and check out the wardrobe. I think it's interesting to note that every time Lucy goes in the wardrobe, it talks about how she's wise and discerning, because she always slightly leaves the wardrobe door ajar. Because she knows it's not a very smart thing to do to lock yourself in a wardrobe, because you could get locked in it. But then the second time she's in the wardrobe, she does the same thing, and sure enough, she gets back into Narnia.
Yeah.
And then Edmund comes in after her, and he saw her like go into the wardrobe, so he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna like go in there and make fun of her some more." So he goes into the wardrobe after her, and unlike Lucy. It says that he closes the wardrobe behind him, because he's not wise like Lucy is. Pepper's freaking out.
Yeah, our doggo's sad.
Yes. So he closes the wardrobe door behind him, and he starts going further into the wardrobe, and he can't find his way anywhere anymore. He's groping in the dark.
As C.S. Lewis loves to pen.
You've
read Paralandra.
It's funny, we started reading Paralandra like a couple of years ago, and he just keeps talking about him like groping for things, groping for his matches, groping
like
for the
feeling
ground.
around, but
Yes,
like
feeling
literally
around.
probably 5 times on the same page.
Yeah, he just keeps saying groping over and over again. And then we were reading this, and I was like pointing out, like,
He's not saying
it's
it.
interesting. He's not
His
saying
favorite word.
his favorite word, groping, in this. And literally, like a sentence later, he says Edmund gropes around in the dark.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, that was crazy. But yes, he's groping around in the dark. He can't find the door anymore because he's shut it. And sure enough, he finds his way into Narnia. And he's looking for Lucy, and he can't find her. And then he comes across the White Witch. He sees a sleigh with jingle bells and a little dwarf guy on it.
Yeah.
And the White Witch sitting atop.
Maybe let's read how she's described.
Yeah.
Because it's like an intentional, clear picture.
I think that's... Oh, also, just like a girl, said Edmund to himself, sulking somewhere and won't accept an apology. He's being such a little boy.
They're setting him up as a little
wench.
pest.
Yes. He's not a wench, I guess. Excuse that wench.
Don't cite what that is.
So yes, he sees these reindeer, and then atop in a much higher seat in the middle of the sledge sat a very different person, a great lady, taller than any woman that Edmund had ever seen. She also was covered in white fur up to her throat, and held a long, straight golden wand in her right hand, and wore a golden crown on her head. Her face was white, not merely pale, but white like snow or paper or icing sugar, except for her very red mouth. It was a beautiful face in other respects, but proud and cold and stern. The sledge was a fine sight, and she asks what he is, and he says he's Edmund, and goes on and on. She finds out that he's a son of Adam.
Yes.
And then chapter 4 is called Turkish Delight. Turkish Delight. Hey,
Delight.
We have 13 minutes.
Turkish Delight. Wait, one more time.
Turkish Delight. Chapter 4 is called Turkish Delight. Oh, good stand, Peas.
She wants to get in on the Turkish Delight.
Yeah.
Vote below if you think it's terrible. It's not good. Unless you've had good ones.
I think
that I
had
haven't had
a good Turkish Delight one time.
Okay.
I had them when I was a kid, and it was terrible.
Good enough to cause Edmund to stumble, though.
I think James gave me a Turkish Delight at one point. But
you know what? The bulk barn ones I've heard are good.
Okay.
Someone said that to me. I think I've only had like weird tin ones.
I think James had some from like Costco or something, and they were good. I seem to remember. Maybe I'm remembering wrong.
Yeah.
But yes. So he's talking to the queen. She's getting him to talk. Not the queen. She's the White Witch. But
she says she is.
She says she's the queen. And she's getting him to spill all of this information. One of the things he sadly spills is that Mr. Tumnus let Lucy go, which, again, he thinks he's talking to the queen, so he thinks he's doing no wrong at this point. But he basically snitches on him by accident.
Snitches get stitches.
And at first, it seems like snitches get stitches indeed. At first, it seems like she's about to kill him. But then she goes, "Oh, my poor child. Look how cold you look." And she turns completely on a dime. And she wraps him up in a fur cloth and warms him up and gives him a delicious hot drink. I don't know if it's hot cocoa or what.
That she makes from a drop from like a
bottle.
Flask or whatever, which is crazy.
She uses magic to make him like, I don't know if it's hot cocoa because it says that he's never had it before.
Right.
And maybe he's just never had hot cocoa.
But it says the Turkish Delight has some like kind of spell on it that makes them unable to live without having more of it.
It actually
wanting
says
more of it.
I'd like to find the exact
yeah, it's horrifying.
because it literally says that he'd eat until he dies. At last, the Turkish delight was all finished, and Edmund was looking very hard at the empty box, wishing that she would ask him whether he would like some more. Probably the queen knew quite well what he was thinking, for she knew, though Edmund did not, that this was enchanted Turkish delight, and that anyone who had once tasted it would want more and more of it, and would even, if they were allowed, go on eating it till they killed themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's crazy.
Yeah.
Um,
I didn't remember that.
yeah.
Like, I have more empathy for Edmund that way because he's
Yeah.
like powerless to stop it with a force beyond himself.
Yeah.
At first, I was like, "This isn't even good, bro. Why are you stumbling?" But
Well, I feel that the movie, it's harder to empathize with him.
yeah, we don't have
because
that context.
The movie doesn't give that context. You think that he just loves Turkish delight so much that he'd sell his
betray his siblings
out.
into slavery.
Although again, he doesn't know for sure that the queen is evil. Although
But
he should.
again, the various levels of discernment that
Yes.
C.S. Lewis writes, Edmund is not discerning.
Mhm. He's very undiscerning. He just wants more Turkish delight. Yeah, so she tells him, you can't have more Turkish delight until you bring me your brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, why not? And she's like, oh, well, I want to make you a prince and eventually the king, and they'll be your servants. But if you come to my palace, you'll never want to leave, so you have to bring them with you.
Again, the prophecy, right?
Yeah, and she says, I might have to be
Four
very
thrones.
angry with you if you came alone.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, she wants the 4 children taken care of because of the 4 thrones.
Mm-hmm.
And right as the White Witch leaves him, he comes into contact with Lucy.
Yeah.
And Lucy's all happy that she's not alone now in seeing Narnia.
Mm-hmm.
And she talks about the White Witch. This is an interesting thing too. The White Witch, said Edmund. Who's she? She's a perfectly terrible person, said Lucy. She calls herself the Queen of Narnia, though she has no right to be queen at all. And all the fauns and dryads and naiads and dwarves and animals, at least all the good ones, simply hate her. And she can turn people into stone and do all kinds of horrible things. And she has made a magic so that it is always winter in Narnia, always winter, but it never gets to Christmas. And she drives about on a sledge drawn by reindeer, and with her wand in her hand and a crown on her head. Edmund was already feeling uncomfortable from eating too many sweets, and when he had heard that the lady he had made friends with was a dangerous witch, he felt even more uncomfortable. But he still wanted to taste that Turkish delight again more than he wanted anything else. So that kind of shows you him as a character. He feels uncomfortable with the witch. He doesn't necessarily trust her, but he wants Turkish delight more than he doesn't trust her. And he eventually even starts turning. It says that he's worried about Lucy going and excitedly telling Peter and Susan about everything, because he's already in his head starting to side with the witch more than anything else. So you can kind of see the different
Responses.
Yeah, then levels of discernment as to what's going on.
But it's Lucy hasn't encountered the White Witch, so he's come more into contact with evil than she has, in fairness. But I think a good parallel, like we were talking about, is Diggory talking with her about his mother's health and her promising healing to her, but he's still I don't know if I can fully trust this person. I'm still going to obey Aslan. So I think it's they're 2 very different responses in the face of the same woman.
I think it's interesting, the way that C.S. Lewis writes these evil sort of characters. How C.S. Lewis writes these sort of evil characters, how evil almost tends to overplay its hand, where when Diggory's encountering the witch and she's trying to convince him to eat the fruit, he's almost buying what she's saying,
right?
But then she overplays her hand and says I don't remember exactly, but she says something about oh, you could be the most powerful man in the world or whatever. And he's kind of snaps
what?
out of it. He's wait, I thought we were just talking about healing my mother. What are you talking about now? And realizes that she's just being evil and trying to say anything to deceive
because
him.
I think she believes that the people she's talking to also are prideful enough to want power and more, right?
Yes.
She's this will appeal to a person.
Yes.
But to an average normal child who's just concerned with the health of their mother, he's gonna be sus. That's Like she starts with a promise that's accessible to them, but then it's like, wait, what are you talking about? Because she escalates these false promises. And I think that's obviously a parallel
Yes.
to Satan.
Because the White Witch is convincing Edmund, and she says some like pretty wild stuff that like if he were more discerning, he would like pick those things out and be like, wait, I don't know if I believe you. What is it? Yeah, she says, and by the way, said the Queen, you needn't tell them about me. It would be fun to keep it a secret betwixt us two. It doesn't say betwixt. But,
For the betwixt heads.
For the betwixt heads. Keep it a secret betwixt us two, wouldn't it? Make it a surprise for them. Just bring them along the 2 hills. A clever boy like you will easily think of some excuse for doing that.
Calling him clever too when she knows that like she can use him because he's stupid.
Yes. But she's buttering him up.
Yeah,
you know?
appealing to him and flattering him.
And when you come to my house, you could just say, let's see who lives here, or something like that. I'm sure that would be best. If your sister has met one of the fawns, she may have heard strange stories about me, nasty stories that might make her afraid to come to me. Fawns will say anything, you know. And now, and she kind of goes on about that. So she even like lets on that like, oh, people probably have negative opinions of her, but like coming up with an excuse for it. So she's preempting the negative opinions of her. But also, if you had any discernment, if you heard somebody say something like that, you'd be like, wait
what opinions?
Yeah, you'd be kind of
self-report
put off by that. So that's the first 4 chapters of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah, we're leaving off with like, what will Edmund do? And obviously, if you've read, you know.
So yes, this was just us trying out this format, and we're looking forward to doing more of these and getting into a rhythm with it.
Finishing the book and then maybe starting another book.
Yes.
In the same series or a different series.
Perhaps. But it would be cool if people could read along and give their thoughts and opinions. So for the next episode, next week, we're going to read another 4 chapters of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So follow along with us at home and leave your opinions in the comments. Tell us what we could do. Tell us what you think.
Yeah. And other book recommendations. Like we were talking about how it doesn't necessarily have to be like fiction.
Yes.
We could read like Plato's Republic and like philosophy books and do little discussions as well.
Yeah, that would be interesting too. So thanks for tuning in to Betwixt the Lines. We'll catch you next time. Love you all.